Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show, the only English-speaking program explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in the prime time. And I'm Natalia Humenyuk, and we informally discuss all the most important and acute topics. And we've been shocked today as the Ukrainians to hear that the Ukrainian activist and the political advisor Katya Gandyuk had passed away after injuries she has received after acid attack 3 months ago. So that's the news of today, but that's not the only story we are covering with the guest. That's what we have for you tonight. The Ukrainian activist and political advisor Katerina Gandyuk has died following an acid attack in July. German Chancellor Angela Merkel's visit to Ukraine. What did she discuss with the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko? Ukraine enters election season. We take a look at the key political figures of today. Alexander Hug, the principal deputy chief monitor of the OSCE monitoring mission to Ukraine, stepped down. What to expect next? So we have with us Daria Kaleniuk, who is Ukrainian anti-corruption activist and executive director of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, and Andreas Umland, who is senior fellow at the Institute for Euro-Atlantic Cooperation. And we were planning to discuss also the visit of Angela Merkel here, but of course now I should say that we have right at the moment the rally in front of the Ministry of the Interior. It's taking place at least in 7 towns in Ukraine because of the death of Katya Gandyuk, who had become famous internationally as well because of that horrible acid attack, which happened in July. I would remind, Katya was pointing out she was very critical to the regional national police, but as well also mentioned the corruption cases there. But Daria just probably would say, I probably would just start that it's a huge shock for the Ukrainian civil society because I think like we underestimated how serious the things are, and then the activists could be killed.
Yes, actually Katya was so strong and we were encouraged with her strength. A month ago she recorded a video. This video was recorded after another activist was attacked with a bullet, and she was recording this video from the hospital. She told that she feels very bad, but the justice and fairness in Ukraine are much worse because no one is treating that.
I just would mention that you can see this video that our team is working just in front of the Ministry of Interior here in Kyiv, where people just reminding and demanding the punishment, investigation and reaction from the Ministry of Interior, in particular because the Ministry of Interior himself, Arsen Avakov, didn't mention this case himself like today, or despite all the efforts of the activists to make this case to reach the high-level politicians, I think that was not really successful.
That he is not reacting. He is in charge for providing security, actually, and first of all, security for activists. But Katerina was exposing some corrupt deals of his agency in the region, and unfortunately, he is not reacting and not even commenting that. I would like to say that there are 3 agencies in Ukraine which are in charge for protection of security of activists. The Security Service of Ukraine should prevent such kind of attacks. They have to identify possible threats and prevent such attacks. Police has to guard and safeguard not only activists but citizens of Ukraine. And prosecution office has to investigate when the attack happened or another crime happened and how to bring this case to the court. So unfortunately, all 3 agencies failed to deliver justice and to protect Katerina. This case is very important because, unfortunately, it's not the only one case where activists in the regions, which are watchdogging the state and regional government, are being physically attacked. And the price of life, of human life in Ukraine becomes very cheap because it's so easy to get rid of the person which is shouting too loud and exposing regional corruption. You simply have go and you order to get rid of this person, to attack and even to kill, as this happened in this case.
I should also say that in the middle of September, Ukrainian General Prosecutor Yulia Lutsenko stated that a potential organizer of the murder agreed to testify about the case. He probably meant Serhiy Torbin, who was named to be an organizer, and there were another two persons who are under house arrest. So today the General Prosecutor Office said that they talked to more than 300 persons, but still it's a very prominent case. And, you know, Katya had been alive. She could speak to the authorities. It was very difficult for her to speak to the journalists. She was talking to our team, but still. And Andreas, how would you assess this particular case, looking at, you know, we're speaking about the attack to the civil society, but that's murder.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately testifies to the fact that not that much has changed apparently since 2014 in certain parts of Ukrainian society or in the regions, for instance, and that would have been a case and an event that would be sort of would fall within the logic of Yanukovych's regime, and there, you know, we had also these cases, and now this happens here, and especially with somebody who was investigating corruption in the police. This is also a bit sort of, it doesn't fit into the whole pathos of the Euromaidan and the new government that came in after the Euromaidan. So this is very disappointing, and I think one can see it as a symptom for a larger failure to achieve a breakthrough in terms of fighting corruption.
And Daria, I mean, it might be a strange question, but that's what I would like to ask. Like, how it feels. Like, for me, it's the case when it feels that you can't be secure at all if you're anti-corruption activist, in particular if you live outside of Kyiv, and in particular if you're probably not out of this circle of prominent people. And what could be also done, how the civil society would react, because it's a different level of security. It's not just like the attack, which is always, you know, defamation, discreditation. There is something different. You have just the people who can come and kill.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Being an activist in the region, if you are acting alone, if you are not connected to media, if you are not connected to activists on the national level, it's risky to your life to watchdog your government. And the reason for that is because in every region there are small oligarchic circles, local small oligarchs who control police, who control prosecution office, who control government. And these people, they don't care what president says, they don't care what foreign embassies say, they don't care even if there is something in national media. They simply care to protect their ill-gotten funds, and that's it. And to break these small oligarchic circles in the regions, there has to be working law enforcement agencies. There has to be working police and prosecution. And the reason why physical attacks are happening more and more in Ukraine, especially this year, is because of the failure of the reform of prosecution and police. Disregarding Lutsenko is saying to everyone that entire prosecution office on the national level and on the regional level is reformed. Disregarding Minister Avakov is claiming that entire police reformed. It's the same, even worse. They got the carte blanche. After the Revolution of Dignity, there was an opportunity and possibility to use the window of opportunity to do the reform. Now, bad guys are returning to the bad practices, and they understand that they will be untouchable and unpunished. And I'm afraid that if there will be no high-level reaction of all heads of law enforcement agencies in Ukraine on this attack, there will be more and more physical attacks, especially on the regional activists.
I would like we watch the last words of Katya Gandyuk. There was the one chance when there was opportunity to talk to her. That was her appeal to the Ukrainians while she was in hospital. So I suggest we watch that.
Всім привіт, друзі! Мені не дуже дозволяють багато говорити, тому я не буду говорити дуже багато. По-перше, я хочу подякувати вам всім за те, що я жива, і хочу подякувати вам всім за ваші хороші слова, вони дуже мотивують. І хочу подякувати за погані слова, вони насправді мотивують ще більше вийти з лікарні якомога швидше. Так, я знаю, що я виглядаю зараз погано, але принаймні мене лікують, і мене лікують дуже добре українські лікарі. І я точно знаю, що я виглядаю зараз набагато краще, ніж виглядають в Україні справедливість і правосуддя. Тому що їх сьогодні не лікує ніхто. Мені дуже важко, і мені важко навіть насправді записувати це звернення. Більше 40 нападів за останній рік. Хто замовив всіх цих людей, хто покриває замовників, чому така кількість розслідувань саботується, чому ми заохочуємо людей до громадської діяльності, але не можемо їх захистити. Але я вірю, що всі винні будуть знайдені, покарані і засуджені, і що кожен із нас буде вільним і не буде мати в серці страху.
Remind Katya Hadyuk is a civic activist and political advisor from the South Ukrainian city of Kherson, so she passed away today. Around approximately 30% of her body suffered from burns, and she remained in the hospital for over 3 months after the attack, undergoing 11 surgeries. You know, Katya mentioned these 40 attacks on the activists. Maybe you'll give an understanding as well. So what's happening? And who are particularly under threat? What kind of people? For doing what?
These are merely people from the regions. One of the last known is Oleksii. He is activist in Odessa, who was also exposing the ill activity and corrupt activity of the local government. One of the activists who was actually also physically attacked, but with another green liquid, is Vitaly Shabunin, our head of the board. And here I'd like to mention why I think the Minister Avakov is keeping silence. At the event when our head of the board was attacked, we identified the presence of the half-legal department which was present at that event and which actually conducted provocations. And that department was part of the Ministry of Interior. In fact, what we have now, we have legalized thugs, so-called legalized titushkas, which are working under the umbrella of the Ministry of Interior. And the Minister Avakov is aware of that for sure. So I think this is one of the reasons why he is not reacting on this case and actually not reacting on all other attacks of the activists.
And President Petro Poroshenko some hours ago condemned the attack, but that was one of his first statements regarding that, rather general. Andreas, if you speak about Ukraine international relations and, you know, in particular attention to what's happening between the government and the civil society and the role of the civil society, how do you think, what would impact it has also on, I won't use this word image, it's not just about image, it's like how you really need to perceive Ukraine and the Ukrainian authorities trying to understand what's happening with the reforms, what's not happening, because everybody tries to balance.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of the sad, as I already mentioned, result that the old system is reproducing itself in new guise. I think maybe the biggest, I would say, strategic failure, which is going probably to repeat itself next year, was the lacking change of the electoral system, which then for the parliamentary elections, which led then again this old system to reproduce itself. And I'll be afraid that next year we again going to have elections according to the old electoral system, which is very corrupt. And I think the Verkhovna Rada is maybe as important in all of that as the presidential office, or even more important. And so I think the conclusion from this is something that has been even described in this sort of academic literature already, that we cannot hope for Ukraine to reform via its political class, because the political class can reproduce itself as it did already for 25 years. So reforms have to be done by civil society, and the civil society has to be supported by international organizations. And there is this so-called sandwich model, which then is this reform model where the international donor organization and the civil society pressure the political class towards reforms that are against the interests of the political class.
Dasha, we're coming to the period of the elections, and of course there are a lot of activities. Not everything is connected to elections. For instance, Katya Handzuk was working on the regional level, on the local level, and she was speaking about this everyday corruption, about everyday bribes that, for instance, one of the heads of the law enforcement was demanding like 3% of money for every single transaction or operation, these kind of things. But do you believe that, or do you think that within the campaign we are coming, when it's always getting more ruthless in any country, I should say, today, but that there are also some concerns how people should protect themselves, because there are more people coming to the streets, more people kind of speaking, and it matters.
And more people in the regions are trying to control their government, and more people, I hope, will be trying to control the election procedures. It is important for all such activists and us to stay together and to have contacts with media, with national media, with international media, and with international organizations, what Andreas told. The case of Kateryna Handzuk became known because she was known regional activist, but there are also activists which are acting themselves with no support, and there are some people like that heavily beaten, and no one even knows about that. So what we see is the top of the iceberg. When the citizen of Ukraine wants to protect his interests, wants to demand the proper services from the state, exposes corruption and asks for justice, he or she puts his or her life on real physical risk. So what we will do right now, there is a street action in front of the police, Ministry of Interior in Kyiv. The same action is in front of regional police offices across the country. We will continue demanding Minister of Interior Arsen Avakov, head of the Prosecution General Yulia Lutsenko, and the President of Ukraine to reply to the question, who ordered Kateryna Handzuk, whose interest was to kill her, and why police, security service, and prosecution office did not react on time properly and didn't protect her.
And in particular, yes, you have the people who probably were executors and perpetrators, but those who ordered are, as usually in Ukraine, not found. And my last from you, as I know you're going to the rally, we were here to discuss also the visit of Angela Merkel, German chancellor, to Ukraine. You had a chance to meet her. You've been in the group of the activists and civil society leaders. So I know you also mentioned the case of Kateryna Handzuk, and probably let us know what was your message and how it felt. You know, do you see that there would be support or any action?
We passed the letter signed by about 20 organizations to Angela Merkel, highlighting the recent increase of attacks on activists. And we emphasized the importance of the case of Kateryna Handzuk. We presented the T-shirt to Angela Merkel with question, who ordered Kateryna Handzuk? And she agreed to make a picture of that. I hope this picture will be available soon. And Chancellor was... She was very worried about Kateryna, and she told that, okay, tell her to recover soon. It happened just 2 days ago, you know, when we all hope that she will recover, but I can't even imagine. We were talking to Chancellor about arranging the treatment for her in Germany or in Austria, and you know, if a little bit more time could probably help to get it for her. Unfortunately, it's too late.
Dasha, thanks a lot for I know you'll go for the rally. We're also following the rallies in different towns, and for letting us know. And we'll go on with that topic with Andreas. We'll also later would be joined by another colleague. So Andreas, I probably would ask also, like, can you give this? So it's important for Chancellor to talk to. She really understand what's happening with the civil society in Ukraine. What do you think, what impact it has to the Ukrainian-German relations?
Yeah, I mean, this meeting with the civil society activists just testifies to this understanding now in the West that civil societies in Ukraine the major driver of reform and needs support. Normally, the heads of state and government, they would be having a full schedule to meet governmental officials and speak to different ministers and or maybe to business people as well. But here in Ukraine, indeed, there is this situation that, as I mentioned already, that because of the reproduction of the old political class, civil society has now become a major partner for the West in driving forward reforms.
Still, obviously we can see the picture, and Chancellor Merkel met with the president. They have long-time relations because she is one of the driving force regarding also the conflict in the East, conflict between Ukraine and Russia. But what are the most important issues on table today? Also, this week we learned that she will step out from her position at the party.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a scheduled visit, and it was, I think, the first longer visit that she made to Ukraine. And I think it was already planned before it was clear that she would leave the position of head of the major governing party of the Christian Democratic Union, and she may even may have to leave already before 2021 if things get sort of more tense in the political party spectrum in Germany. And so I think the function of this visit was largely predetermined by the larger issues that are on the table. And this is first of all the Minsk process and the sort of future options how to solve the Donbass problem. The second is the association agreement and the entire relationship between Ukraine and the European Union and Germany as well. And the third was the support for the different reform programs that are here in Ukraine now, also supported by Western donor organizations that help Ukrainian ministries to implement certain aspects of reforms. For instance, she visited the head office of the major decentralization funding program. Yulia is the name here in Kyiv. So there were a whole number of topics that were important here, and the most sort of difficult one is, of course, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
So what will happen
with Nord Stream 2?
Yep.
I don't know yet. I have colleagues in the US who say Nord Stream 2 will not be completed, and it's now being built, but the building will not finish, and I hope so as well. There's a lot of discussion still going on in Poland, in the European Union, driven by Poland, mainly this discussion. There's a discussion between the US and Germany about this. And there's also increasing discussion, as I observe, within Germany about this project. The Green Party that is now up in the polls has very strongly come out and quite explicitly come out against this project. So I think there is still a chance that it will not be completed, or there is then, so to say, plan B, to have a solution that the pipeline will be built, but still there will be a significant part of the gas that comes from Siberia and some from Central Asia and goes to the European Union will still go through Ukraine.
Can we assess also I know it's difficult, but you're an analyst, to what extent, particularly Chancellor Merkel is satisfied with the progress Ukraine is doing in different things. In particular, we can speak about the reforms, and also then we can pass to the whole issue of the implementation of the Minsk agreement by the Ukrainian side, to the extent the Ukrainian side can do that?
Well, I think for the Minsk agreements, just to get it out of the way, I think there is now an understanding in the West that there can be no serious conversation about the sort of political parts of it before the security and military parts of it are resolved. I don't know what Merkel thinks about the progress of reforms in Ukraine, but I think there is now, at least in the German political elite, a better understanding than used to be for the difficulties, the specific difficulties that Ukraine is facing, and both domestically and externally. What I see in the future could happen is once Moscow decides to resolve the issue in the Donbass, there will be probably a tense discussion between Ukraine and the European Union, and also between Ukraine and Germany and Ukraine and France about these political parts of the Minsk agreements, if we ever get to their implementation. Currently, it's not a hot topic because the security issues are not resolved, but if Moscow decides that it wants to restore its trade relationships with the European Union, then we will, I see that now already sort of in the waiting, we will have a very tense discussion between the West and Ukraine about the Minsk agreements.
But at the same time, what also Ukraine, in terms of security, in terms of the relations with Russia, can expect from Germany, knowing that Chancellor Merkel would leave? Because I think there was a discussion. I think there was a concern because, everything is about these relations between, Vladimir Putin, Russian president, and of course she is a figure. She is one of the strongest leaders globally, if not the strongest. And of course, she was clearly supportive towards Ukraine, despite all the criticism which was here, because of course she's not so tough in her words, but more in action. So of course, among the Ukrainian elite, there were always things that, probably she's not too tough, as we expect from, for instance, other world leaders. However, you clearly know that Germany is a reliable partner.
Well, I think the problem is going to be not so much that she will leave and then there will be a new German leader who may take another course. I don't think the course will actually change. The three candidates that are now talked about most, I would expect to follow a similar foreign political course. Well, the most popular, as it seems, is a man called Friedrich Merz, who was a former activist for and politician for the Christian Democratic Union, and he is also, that is worth mentioning here, head of a German organization called the Atlantic Bridge, which is a special German organization for German-American relations, and that would mean that that probably German-American relations would benefit from him becoming a chancellor. Then there is Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, who is sort of an ally of Merkel and currently the General Secretary of the Christian Democratic Union. There's a younger politician called Spahn, who is also has announced his candidacy. So I don't think the foreign political course of Germany will actually change. And if we have new elections, then it could well be that the foreign ministry will come under the control of the Green Party in Germany, which is now up in the polls and which is very pro-Ukrainian. So the sort of the pro-Ukrainian direction could even somewhat increase if we have especially if we have new elections and a new government with the Green Party in it. But what will happen is, I'm afraid, is that the overall weight of Germany within the European Union and in the international sphere will sink because whatever replacement there will be for Merkel, this person will not have the same weight, international weight, and then it's very difficult to predict how the sanctions regime, for instance, will develop. Because if we have somebody not as powerful as Merkel representing Germany within the European Union, then it could happen that the consensus about the prolongation of the sanctions could fall apart.
One of the stories of this week, you mentioned, we were speaking about Angela Merkel, but as well this week, we know there was the last working week of the principal deputy head of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, Alexander Hug, who was also a personality in this conflict. He had been running the mission since 2014. He was there from the very beginning when there was an MH17 crash, moving from Kyiv to Donetsk and spending a lot of time in the region. And for us as a journalist who were communicating with the people, we know that he was really on the ground. And there is a difference between the people who are... We would have the Mark Etherington, who is a British a diplomat and who would also, a person with a pretty strong security background, who has some of the experience and had been in Ukraine for some time, for a couple of months in the beginning of the conflict, but still, still it's a bit of the era. I also suggest, before we go on with the talk, that we listen to some of the answers to the questions we had to Alexander Hug in our exclusive interview.
You always write and always say about these people, just locals who are like kids and poor people. In all this situation, I mean 4.5 years, what did you see and what was the most impression for you?
As I just mentioned, the suffering of the civilian population on both sides of the contact line, and in general the suffering of Ukrainians across the country from this unnecessary conflict has been a very, very deep experience for me, and one that I won't forget, of course. I also, of course, have met people directly and personally who have been affected by the conflict, who have been suffering. And what was equally amazing is that, with a few exceptions, all of these Ukrainians that I have met, especially near the contact line, they have not developed hate. They all believe in the possibility to have this conflict ending quickly, and made very clear to me and my colleagues that it is not their conflict.
You always said that this conflict can be end for 1 hour, ceasefire or something like this. Why it's not happened till now?
Well, first of all, everybody understands weapons don't fire by themselves. Someone needs to pull the trigger, and for that person to pull a trigger, orders are either being issued or the person acts without an order, and then his actions are tolerated. And for an order to be issued, a decision needs to be taken that normally is a political decision. So if you put that chain back to the beginning, that is then very clear that political decisions are required to issue these orders, which we have demonstrated have been issued in the past, and when they have been issued, they have been largely been adhered to. It's not an impossibility to end this, but this has to happen by all who have a responsibility to end this conflict, and these are the ones who have signed the Minsk Agreement, that is Moscow, Kyiv, and certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. If these stakeholders do not issue these orders, not take these political decisions, it will continue. But once they are taken...
For all this period, 4 years and how much time it was the silence?
We have not witnessed a single day without ceasefire violations. We have had days where small arms fire only was used by the sides, which is much less of concern for civilians. But our own records show clearly that there hasn't been a day without a ceasefire violation, without the use of weapons, which is the language used in the Minsk.
One more question about not only ceasefire, but about the mission, about the possibility to go everywhere to your mandate. About this part of non-controlled border, Ukrainian-Russian border. You was there at some days or no? And if it's in other places where mission never was?
Myself and my colleagues are quite often near that and at the unsecured border with the Russian Federation. The problem is, until we get there, if we drive from Luhansk or Donetsk, we have to pass through multiple checkpoints. By the time we arrive at these border crossing points, the people there, these armed men, know that we are coming, and if not otherwise, they would tell us quite often, especially in the Luhansk region, to move back some 500, 600 meters. And because they also don't allow us to open permanent presences nearby the border, Novozovsk, Antratsit, for instance, we also have to leave the border areas rather quickly. in order to reach the bases further away. That also limits the time we can be there.
Andreas, for somebody who is following what's going on with the conflict and the conflict resolution, OSCE had been heavily criticized by the Ukrainians that, they are not doing enough. But I would be I use my opportunity to say that sometimes I think that a lot of people just don't understand the mandate. Because when we read the reports, there is a lot in there. The point, how do we use these reports? Still, of course, as we heard, that they couldn't reach anywhere. The mission depends on the Russian will, the mandate. So what do you think? Could it be different? What should be done with that? And how we can make the most out of what we can from the international organizations when there is no will of the counterparts?
Well, I think what you said is right. I would also defend here rather the OSCE mission. It's also an organization, of course, where Russia and the allies of Russia are member states, and therefore this mission has to behave in a certain way because its mandate is also predetermined oddly by countries like Russia. This is all a very strange situation. But it's an unarmed mission, it's only an observation mission, and it's fully dependent on the cooperation of the various sides or the various groups that are there, and therefore it's not a solution, of course, and maybe there was too much expectation from this observation mission. What is really needed here, I think, for a transition period when we finally get to the point that Russia will be ready to solve this issue, not because it wants to solve it, of course, but because it may be so much interested in restoration of normal trade relations and normal economic relations with the European Union and with other countries around the world that it will finally agree to a resolution. Then we will hopefully get an armed UN mission, and this would be then a different story, which would have a different mandate, which would not be just observing, which would have a totally different function there, and which the function of which would be actually to drive out these armed groups and these Russian-supported fighters, and that would be hopefully then something that Ukrainians would be more satisfied with. But unfortunately, for that, it is needed that Moscow makes the decision to actually resolve the conflict in order to get rid of the sanctions.
Unfortunately, I probably should mention that it doesn't look like something in a very foreseen future. It's something which may happen in the long run, but not in the...
I would put it in very simple terms. If the oil price falls again, then I think we will see some... Because I think it's just for the Russian leadership, it's a sort of a balancing of the political benefits of this conflict, and it has political benefits, domestic political benefits and foreign political benefits, and the socio-economic costs for sustaining this conflict. And if the costs, both the direct costs and the indirect costs because of the sanctions, become too high, and this could happen if the oil price sinks again, then I could imagine that there might be a change of direction in Moscow.
Andreas, thanks a lot for the discussion and for your knowledge. I also would remind that you can watch the full interview with Alexander Hud on our webpage en.hromadske.ua and our YouTube channel. There is a YouTube channel of Hromadske International, and as well follow us on social networks, on Facebook, Hromadske International, on Twitter, at Hromadske. So there you also will have more information about what's happening with the investigation and with the rallies connected to the death of Katya Handzuk, Ukrainian activist and political advisor who passed away today after the acid attack, which had happened 3 days, and an event which had shocked us today and probably is a sad highlight of this week and this month most probably. So thanks a lot for being with us. That was the Sunday show, and my name is Natalia Humaniuk.
Близько 12 години ранку. Це дуже сильно сколихнуло активістів. Вони одразу мобілізувалися, у кожному місті організували акції. Власне, о 7 годині